What up?
Hello, how are you doing? On Talk, and this is a collaborative podcast between me and my good friend Kehan the Friesman. So do keep that in mind.
Yep, exclusively for you guys, and this is pretty much the pilot episode. So, what we're gonna talk about is pretty much to be expected for those of you who watch either one of our channels. We're just gonna be going over some general topics in relation to genetics, in relation to history, both contemporary and ancient, and stuff like that, Yeah, so we're glad to be launching this podcast for y'all. Alright, so Iranshahr, would you like to give any opening statements or anything?
So I would just like to say, if you haven't checked out my channel already, you should. I cover the latest genetic data concerning the Iranian homeland, as well as the origins of modern day Iranians, as well as the origins of other Iranic groups within the Middle East, including the Kurds, Azerbaijanis, Tajiks, as well as the Pashtuns.
Speaking of which, I've actually heard you refer to the Jats as one of the supposed Indo-Aryan groups that have a ton more, that have way more Aryan steppe admixture than Indo-Iranics do on average. Care to elaborate on that a bit more for us?
Yeah, so the Jats are very much an isolated Indo-Aryan tribe. Though they have been mixing during these past centuries, nonetheless, they've largely managed to maintain around 30 to 45% steppe ancestry, which is interesting, and that's a lot higher than Brahmins, as well as more Pakistani and Northwest Indian groups, as well as Iranian, so that's quite interesting.
So up to 45%. And how did that happen? Is it due to basically how the ethnography in the subcontinent basically evolved? Is it due to their particular isolation, their particular endogamy, or what?
Yeah, so I think it's more to do with their isolation and endogamy. But what's interesting here is that they also likely received additional gene flow from a steppe source from the Scythians or related groups during the antique period. So what's interesting here is that they probably have ancestry from the Vedic Aryans, as well as later ancestry from a Scythian or Indo-Iranian source.
An Indo-Iranian source. By that, you would mean Pathans?
No, I would mean the actual Indo-Iranians, the original Indo-Iranians who migrated into the Indian subcontinent. And actually, these Jats, some of them have more steppe ancestry than the Pakistani Pashtuns or the Pathan, and also than the Afghan Pashtuns.
Okay, I like how you separated Pashtun and Pathan from each other. I've always been under the assumption that the two are synonyms. So what would be the main difference?
So Pathan mostly refers to Pakistani Pashtuns and Pashtun, Afghan Pashtuns, but Pakistani Pashtuns don't like being called Pathan and they prefer being called Pakistani Pashtuns.
Okay, but as far as ethnography, genetics, culture, and all that's concerned, they're pretty much the same?
No, there's a bit of distinction.
Oh, yeah. The ones south of the Durand, they would be a bit more Indic in their, admixture. Yeah, I remember. And why would that be?
I think it's due to mixing with the native South Asian populations. They migrated into the what's today Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in Pakistan. Once they migrated to the region, they mixed with the natives who were mostly who had elevated their ASI than they did, and this led to them coalescing into one group. So that's why Pakistani Pashtuns tend to have more ASI ancestry than Afghan Pashtuns.
Right. And I've even recalled you referring to the KPK Pashtuns as Pashtunized Dardics, to be exact. And now unpack that terminology for us. What exactly is a pasteurized Dardic? First and foremost, a lot of my viewers would probably be clueless as to who and what the Dardic people are. So, care to elaborate?
The Dardics are native Indo-Aryan groups, and it's not correct to call them Pashtunized Dardics, but they do have around half of their ancestry comes from an Afghan Pashtun source, whereas the remainder comes from a Dardic source. So yeah, that's interesting.
Okay, but the Dardics, the Jots, the Kalash, and all that, is their Aryan admixture Bemacized, or are they part of the Vedic tribes that surpassed the Bemac without admixing there?
No, they're part of the Vedic tribes that most likely surpassed Bemac without admixing there.
Right. And by that logic, and per consequence of that, lots of Pakistani Pashtuns wouldn't be Bemacized as a result?
No, some Pakistani Pashtuns likely do have Bemacized ancestry, but the Dardics, the native Dardics of Pakistan, do not.
Right. And a common observation made, particularly by a group of people you like to clown on a lot on your channel, the white nationalists, they usually, well, not usually, but commonly comment on how Europid the phenotypes of Pashtuns, Tajiks, Kalash people, etc., are. But we know for a fact that they are not Europids, either by virtue of their ethnography or by virtue of their genetic profile. Yes, the substantive step admixture is there within them, but they're also neglecting the Neolithic Iranian component and possibly even the Ong admixture, if you can correct me on that, within these tribes.
Yeah, so you're right. They're wrong to say that these tribes are largely of Nordic European descent or are closer to them, whereas the genetic evidence shows that the Kalash and the Nuristanis are closer to the population of South and Central Asia than they are to the Europeans, specifically the Nords.
Right. And the Yagnobis, I forgot about them. They would be Bemacized, and their amount of Neolithic Iranian farmer is too high and too substantive for them to be considered a Nordic population.
Yes.
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. But basically, the Yagnobis and Pamiris and Highland Tajiks, they would be good representatives of what the Aryans who migrated to Iran would have looked like.
Yeah,
but what about the ones who migrated to India? Would the Jots and Kashmiris fit that description?
Yeah, somewhat that's true, though keep in mind that these groups have ASI as well as Iran Neolithic ancestry, something with the early Vedic Aryans lacked.
Right. And the Kashmiris, their amount of step is as high as that of the Jots, is that right?
Yeah.
Right.
No, it's much lower. It's around the same as Punjabis. They're like the Gurjars as well as other Dardic groups, but it's lower than that's found in the Jots. Though it's equivalent to it's 2 to 3% lower than the Jots and 2 to 3% higher than the Gurjars.
Right. So another topic that I'd just like to pivot to real quick is the Iranic states and dynasties that based themselves in the subcontinent. How much of an impact, either genetic or cultural, did they make by your estimation? I'm familiar with the certain amount of bigotry and chauvinism they had towards the followers of Dharma in the subcontinent, particularly Aurangzeb from the Mughals, who didn't like the Hindus very much at all. But what is your take on these dynasties?
I think they didn't leave much of a genetic impact, but culturally they did leave an impact. So first you had the Indo-Greeks, then you had the Scythians, and later on you had the Mughals, and all these groups left a cultural impact, though not much genetic impact on the native South Asian population.
Right, and a cultural impact that would be largely negative.
No, in some instances it's positive, though it can be also be considered negative. It depends on your perspective of South Asian history.
From my objective perspective, the legacy of the Turkic and Iranic dynasties of India is catastrophic. The Ghaznavids, Ghurids, Khaljis, Tughlaqs, Timurids, Lordis, Mughals, Duranis, the Dharmis were the victims of genocidal religious cleansing at the hands of these guys. So, another thing we're going to pivot over to are the Balto Slavs, who we can kind of like consider the Aryans, or rather Proto-Aryans, who never migrated eastwards, who stayed in Europe, who do not have any Iranian farm or any ASI, but who do have a really, really high amount of step admixture. So
I would say the Baltic tribes are very much representative of the ancient Andro population, though keep in mind that those populations had less native European ancestry since they migrated from the Cordate culture without mixing further with the natives, whereas those who stayed back mixed further with the Europeans of the native Europeans.
Right. Yeah, because one interesting thing that I've discovered is that the Lithuanians, their ancient pagan Rumov religion bears close resemblance to that of the Vedic Aryans. Like, they even have this term for their pre-Abrahamic and pre-Christian faith, Darna, I believe it's pronounced, which sounds really, really close to Dharma.
Yeah, that's true. That's very interesting indeed.
Yeah. So another thing that we can pivot over to is the ethnography, particularly of the northwestern side of the subcontinent, which is where these groups like the Kashmiris, the Jats, the high caste Punjabis, the Pathans, etc., are based. It's particularly this region of the subcontinent where steppe admixture is most, I wouldn't say prominent, but is exceeding the most amount of admixture when it comes is exceeding in the most amount of admixture when it comes to the local population. Care to elaborate on the ethnography of the northwest of the subcontinent and how it came to be this way?
Yeah, so what's interesting here is that this is likely due to the migration of the core of the Vedic migration were centered in the northwest and Pakistan, so that's likely why.
Right. So one thing that I'm pondering is, why didn't they just advance further eastwards or further southeastwards? They seem to have just arrived in this valley basin, found their piece of heaven there, and decided to sedentarize themselves there, because a lot of these steppe tribes were nomadic and pastoralist in origin, so it would have made sense to just keep advancing further and not staying put there in the northwest. So how did that happen?
Yeah, well, I would say that this was like, and since they really liked the region, they settled, and I think they didn't want to go any further into the Indian heartland. That's why they were mostly settled in the northwestern part of the subcontinent.
And would the copious amount of pasture lands in that region be a principal reason why?
Yeah, that's likely why.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. But out of all the steppe invaders of the subcontinent, which of them had the most amount of a genetic impact by your estimation?
I would say the original Vedic Aryans followed by the Scythians, the Indo-Scythians. Though it really depends. I think after the Vedic Aryans, the next highest genetic impact is that of the Indo-Scythians.
Okay, it's interesting that you point out the Indo-Scythians because going back to the Jots, they're commonly considered as descendants of the Indo-Scythians, but you and me both know that the Scythians were pretty Europid in their phenotype. They were largely Andronovians, but the Jots, they look pretty Indic, so where is the correlation between the two?
I think they assimilated the native tribes and it mixed with them. That's why the Jots look the way they do today.
Right, but are the Jots Indo-Scythian in origin, or is it more accurate to say that they're like more IVC derived?
No, they are more IVC derived than Computian ancestry. Though it depends. I think it depends on what you consider Indo-Scythian. So they are more IVC derived than their steppe ancestry, though they are more earlier on, derived than they are native Dravidian. So do keep that in mind. That's an interesting phenomenon, actually.
Right, and I recall you telling me at one point that the Bengalis are largely Ong in origin.
Yeah, they're mostly ASI in origin, or Ong. You can say Ong, but the correct term is ASI.
ASI, right. Because the thing is that I know I've seen plenty of people from like the Bengals or from Bangladesh here in like the Six, and some of them look really East Asian in relation to their phenotype.
Yeah, that's because some of them do have additional East Asian ancestry from neighboring Burma, though this is mostly ancient and this is an ancient ancestral source of heritage.
Right. But those like East Asian phenotypes would not be a good representative of the Bengali population at large.
No.
Right. Makes sense. So going back to the Scythians and Sarmatians, we are aware of certain relics that they've left behind, certain vestiges that they've left behind in Europe, whether it's place names, whether it's influences that they've had on Slavic languages, Baltic languages, or whatever. Even some of the Slavs in Europe are assimilated Scythians and Sarmatians, but as far as their ethnic identity, their cultural heritage, their genetic profiles as a whole are concerned, they're pretty much extinct. Would you say so?
Yeah.
Yeah, because the field of Scythian studies was pioneered in Tsarist Russia, and the Russians alongside the Ukrainians and even the Poles like to purport themselves as being of their origin. The Scythians and Sarmatians interacted with the Slavs for sure, but as far as their heritages and lifestyles were concerned, they were worlds apart.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you 100%.
So it's kind of ridiculous for them to be claiming descent from people who they seldom understand and have poorly researched to begin with. And speaking of steppe people, the Proto-Turks, the original Proto-Turks, the Gauge people, they were, I wouldn't say completely of East Asian extraction. They would have had some like Western Eurasian input as well, but they were definitely a people who arose within the context of a Scythian dominated Eurasian steppes. Would you say so?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Like, they weren't like Scythians or Sarmatians themselves, but they definitely had some sort of like correlation with the two of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then again, you could pretty much just say the exact same thing about all steppe tribes as a whole. They tended to like culturally overlap with each other. Not in a genetic sense, but like in a more cultural one.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. But another thing is that I've read like certain studies that tend to relate Altaic people. By Altaic, I don't mean like Turks, but more so like Koreans and the Japanese to the ancient Turanids, and they claim that the Koreans and the Japanese both have some type of relationship with the ancient Scytho-Siberians. Care to comment on that?
That's highly unlikely.
Right. Because another thing, there's another group of steppe people, the Tungusic people, who live in like parts of the Far East, like Manchuria, and they would be one of these kind of like overlapping steppe people, like the Turks, who would be bound to the legacy of the Scythians and the Eurasian steppes by virtue of their like way of life. So would it be too much of a stretch to claim that wherever we find kurgans, wherever we find the type of like fashion sense that the Scythians or the Sarmatians were famous for, is to you know what I mean, like it's a bit too wee-wuzzing to have all these superficial like commonalities and similarities between the peoples of the steppe and correlating them and concluding that, oh, they must all be related or have some sort of connection with the Scythians or Scytho-Siberians. Would you say so?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, but the thing is that the Scytho-Siberians did have significant East Asian ancestry, though, like something like 15 to 30%. Yeah, but it wouldn't have been enough for them to like have looked Turkic, like those Scytho-Siberians that had that amount of East Asian admixture would have looked like the Siberian ice mummy they found. Pretty much, right? Which is pretty Nordic.
Yeah, I would say so. Though keep in mind that the Eastern Scythians had around 20 to 50% Siberian ancestry, but the Western or European Scythians, it does not exceed more than 8 to 10%. So they had minimal West Siberian ancestry, but the Eastern Scythians had significant Siberian and East Asian heritage.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. Then another thing we can pivot to for now are the Anatolian farmers. I think we've pretty much covered the Aryans and the steppe tribes extensively enough for our pilot episode, but we haven't touched on the Anatolian / Zagrosian farmers yet. So you and me both know that a key difference between the Anatolian and Zagrosian farmers is that the former lacks the Neolithic Iran and Caucasus hunter-gatherer component. Or is there more to it than that?
No, they do lack the Iranian farmer or CHD component, but they do have Western hunter-gatherer ancestry. But the Anatolian farmers did not have much from an Iranian-related source.
Right. So the Anatolian farmers who would have founded the Paleo-Balkan cultures, like that of the Vincha and Starchevo cultures, they would not have had a correlation with the Zagrosian farmers by that point.
No.
Right. So they would have shifted too considerably within the WHG, the Western Hunter-Gatherer, and ANE, Ancient Northern Eurasian Fold by that point.
Yes.
Right. But what about the material cultures between the two? They still would have overlapped. Wouldn't have they?
No, not really. It depends though. Somewhat, but not really.
Right. So, in that case, we can't, consider, for instance, the BMAC, the Giraffe, the Helmand cultures as sister cultures to that of the Paleo-Balkan ones.
No.
Yeah, that would be too much of a stretch. Right. Then why don't we pivot over to history then for now? Particularly a topic of great interest and of great debate within the academic community, the Sassanid Empire's decline and collapse, which is as much debated as the decline and collapse of Rome. Yeah, you want to say something?
Yeah, so I actually made a video on this. It's called All the Truth About the Arab Conquest of Iran. So I covered most of this in that video.
Right, but that's after the conquest, like post-Qadisiyah. What about the backstory of the conquests? Like, people tend to attribute the repressive nature of the empire and whatnot for its decline. But you and me both know that history is not so simple and one-sided. They're obviously cherry-picking and ignoring 80 to 90% or more of the full story.
Yes, I agree.
Right. So, one particular question of importance is, why did the masses of Iranshahr celebrate the empire's demise?
I'm not sure. It really depends, but I don't think they celebrated. I think they were very upset about it, and I think they really didn't celebrate most of it.
Right. Yeah, and is your basis for this claim the primary sources that you've read about, the reaction of the population at large, or is this just conjecture?
No, it's based on that took place. Anti-Arab uprising, as well as the uprising against the Arab aristocracy. That means that the Arabs were not really wanted in Iran at the time.
Right. The revolts of Maziar, Baalbek, and whatnot. But that's a couple generations later.
Yeah, that's true. But it still shows that there was angst against the invading Arabs. And during the Arab invasion, there was one rebellion in Astakra. This happened during the Arab invasion, and this led to the complete massacre of the population of the city. So there was still opposition to the Arabs coming from the native inhabitants.
But again, the reaction and sentiment of the general population wasn't not monolithic at all. Wouldn't that have been the case?
I would say so.
Yeah. But we know that the war with Rome, with Byzantium specifically, in the run-up to the conquest was a contributing factor for why the empire fell. The Muslim conquerors took advantage of the exhaustion and weakness of both states, both Byzantium and Iranshahr after that war, and capitalized on it to ensure the victory of Islam. But what about the domestic situation of Iranshahr prior to the conquest?
I say there wasn't much internal opposition to the government or to the Sasanian royalty or the Sasanian leadership.
Right. And what would be the basis for this claim? Because obviously we don't have like a time machine. We can't go back to the 6th century AD and interview the common folk of the empire.
Again, I think based on the later rebellions, it proves that there was support. There was still support, as well as the fact that the Sasanians kept enlarging their army constantly. This means there was some support for the Sasanians, that they managed to continue to replenish their troops after suffering heavy casualties against the Arabs in many of the battles.
Right. But then there were still like Iranians who defected over to the Muslim side, including some Zoroastrians.
That was a minority. That was mostly Parthian elements within Sasanian. It's elements which are sympathetic to the Parthians.
Right. Who never accepted Sassanid rule, the dynastic rule, the coup that overthrew them, basically.
Yeah.
Is that it? Just a pro-Parthian faction of the empire, or are there other demographics we should be aware about?
No, that's it.
That's it? So what about our dear old friend Salman?
I'm not sure if he had a major impact on. I think he did have an impact on the synthesis of Islam, but I don't think he was he became a later figurehead for Iranian nationalists who converted to Islam. But nonetheless, he did not have a major impact on the development of the the development of the Islamic religion, in my opinion.
Right. But Islam and Zoroastrianism specifically did develop some sort of syncretic relationship with each other, like exclusively in Iranshahr, not in the Arab world, but in Iranshahr, in the plateau, specifically, through the likes of not like Salman, but folks like Sundar, like Babak, and them.
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Where did I get cut off?
Oh, I didn't understand that. So you can go back and say
I just said that. Yeah, but Islam and Zoroastrianism did develop some sort of syncretic relationship with each other, like not exclusively, chiefly in Iranshahr, nowhere else. Not like by the influence of Salman, but by the influence of folks like Babak, Sundar, and them. And their ilk, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Right. And even like the neo-pagan writers of Europe have like commented on the scenario too. Chief among them, Evola. And speaking of him, you actually made an entire video about him back in the day. I'm not sure if it's still up now, but he did write about Iranshahr extensively.
Yeah, but I think Avila was more of a Noricist in the guise of a Mediterraneanist, so I wouldn't really trust him for a source here.
Right. But his like neo-dharmic, neo-pagan sensibilities is something that that would be like palatable for those who are like seeking some sort of like alternative to Abrahamic dominance over the West and all that. Right. But all right. I think that's all for our pilot episode. Thanks so much for your time, man. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
I hope everybody watches this podcast and they enjoy it as well. Take care, my friend.
Yeah, likewise. And as usual, if you folks enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and share it wherever it's appropriate. Cheers.